Today we'll be talking about backwater valves, which fall within our Spectrain product line. It's one of the smaller product groupings that we offer with only about a half dozen products in it. So I'd anticipate that we're probably not going to take up the full amount of time today. But we're going to go over the typical agenda and topics that we normally go over, so this slide should look familiar to everyone. We'll start with the value proposition, and we'll talk about what our customers are expecting from our backwater valve products and what can kind of set us ahead of our competitors. We'll talk about how they work, so go in depth on a backwater valve itself and what the different pieces and components are. Talk about the features and benefits of our specific products. Like I said, there's about a half dozen that we're going to look at, and we'll get into the details of those. Then in design and specify, we'll talk about what a customer is thinking and what questions you need to ask to help them specify a product when they're not sure really what product they should offer. Then we'll go into just a summary to recap what we've learned and look at some of the resources that are available on the web and in other places for us. I find it very interesting that this is the oldest product really that Zurn has offered. So when you think back to when Zurn began back in 1900, the first product they got a patent on was the backwater valve, which today is known as the Z1088, and we'll look at that in more detail. So just a little history lesson for you. These products have been around forever. So for building owners, engineers, and contractors, Zurn Industries provides backwater valves that offer protection against interior building damage caused by sewage or other fluids flow backing into your water system. So typically a backwater valve is going to be used on the main water line leaving the building, whether it's your sewage waste line or it could potentially be your storm sewer waste line as well if you're going to have frequent storm sewer backups in that area. And they're used a lot of times in low-lying areas where flooding is really common. So it's really to prevent any of that flooding to come back up the piping and get inside the building, which could potentially damage the basement or other levels of the building if water were to back up through that piping and come up through the floor drains. So most commonly you'll see one backwater valve exiting the building after all of that piping is tied together. But on occasion you'll see individual backwater valves on floor drains inside the building as well. So looking at our three main customers that we always like to focus on, talking about the building owner, they're looking for a durable product that's going to be a low cost of ownership, meaning low maintenance. In the case of a backwater valve, it's one of those products that the building owner doesn't want to have to think about at all. They want it to be installed. They want it to do its job when the time comes, which is going to be an emergency type situation that ultimately could prevent damage or cause damage to the building if the backwater valve doesn't do its job. So they want to make sure that it's a very durable product and that it always works when it needs to. For the architect and engineer, they really have the same concerns in this case. The building owner is trusting them to pick a product that's going to perform and prevent damage to their building. So they're looking for something that's durable, reliable, whenever they're considering a backwater valve product. And then finally with the contractor, a lot of times we like to focus on labor savings. With backwater valves, there's really not too many labor savings available. So what we like to focus on is an ease of maintenance here. So with a backwater valve, there may be time to time that you need to open it up, look inside, and provide a little bit of maintenance. So we want to make sure that it's very easy for the contractor to do that. Pretty self-explanatory with any pieces they need to replace or remove, and very easy to actually access the product itself. So those are the things we're going to keep in mind as far as the contractor is concerned. So looking at a backwater valve itself, let's first start by looking at this visual to get a better idea of where a backwater valve is used within the building. So this could be a residential building, could be an apartment, a house, something like that, or it could be a commercial building. In any case, you're typically going to have that backwater valve, you can see it circled in red there, be the last kind of discharge point or fitting out, going outside the building until that piping runs down to the storm sewer or the main sewage system outside of the building. So you can see that you have a stack coming down through the building, could be coming from sinks or toilets or bathtubs upstairs in this building. Typically at ground level, you're going to see some type of clean out. So probably a lot of you have walked down into your basement, you see the pipe coming down through the building, and typically it's some type of clean out at ground level where you can remove that plug if necessary and run a snake down there to remove any blockage in the line. You can see in this case there's also a floor drain tied in the basement, which again is going to be very common. You need some way to drain any water that builds up down there. And then the backwater valve. So if you imagine the backwater valve not being there, and in the storm sewer possibly having a surcharge and a backup, water is going to creep up that line into the building. The first place it's going to come is up through that floor drain and start to flood that basement, which is very common in those low-lying areas I mentioned, and then even potentially build back up the line from there. So a backwater valve really is going to prevent any of that water from moving up into the building. And some of the key features that you see on backwater valves, most commonly in the spec drain line, you're going to see all these products are made of cast iron. Like a floor drain, like a roof drain, a very durable product that can be cast in concrete. So it's typically a cast iron product. The flappers inside of them can be bronze or PVC, and we'll take a look at some of those. We also offer an all-plastic backwater valve in our light commercial product line, as well as a stainless steel valve in our Z1700 series of stainless steel drains, which can be offered in 304 or 316 stainless steel. So looking at step-by-step of how a backwater valve works. The first thing, if you look at the image on the left here, the thing you want to keep in mind is that water is typically running from left to right in this installation. So maybe the building piping is coming in from your left. On the right-hand side, it's running out to your storm sewer or to your main sewage pipe. So as water moves through that left to right, you can see that there's a flapper valve in there, and that valve kind of hinges on the top pin. Kind of hard to see, but it hinges on the top, so it swings open and closed. So as water's moving through it from the left, that gate's going to swing open and allow it to freely move through. It kind of drops down a little step, so the water's always moving downhill and out of the valve. But as there is a backup and water starts to come in from the right, it's going to hit that gate valve there, or that swinging check valve, and close it. And it's going to push it up against the seat, which is pressed into the cast iron body. So as that pushes closed, on the plastic flapper assemblies, there's an O-ring in there. So the door closes against the O-ring, and the pressure from that back charge is actually going to hold that gate closed and prevent the majority of the water from seeping through there. So like the majority of our products, this product is designed around an ASME standard. And the ASME standard typically calls out acceptable materials, maybe some dimensioning, acceptable coatings. But in the case of backwater valves, there's also a performance standard in there as well that says when you put a certain head pressure on the back charge of it on it, it has to hold a certain amount of water back. So we test these up to 10 feet of head pressure, which is typically industry standard for most gravity plumbing products. And at 10 feet of head pressure, it's a very minimal amount of water that's allowed to get past that flapper. But the thing to keep in mind is that the standard does allow for some water to get past it and still consider it a good product. So about 99.9% of the water that normally would get through that water if the valve wasn't there is going to be prevented from the backwater valve. So a very, very small fractional percentage will be able to seep its way through. But when you think about where this product is normally used and when it might be used, normally during a storm sewer backup, so during a really intense rainfall event, in those low-lying areas, customers know or end users know that their storm sewer or their basement's typically going to back up. So this backwater valve gives them time to prepare for that during a heavy rainfall and maybe move some things in their basements that they need to away from the drains onto higher ground so that they aren't going to get flooded. Whereas without the backwater valve, it's going to be a quick flood of water into that basement, quickly filling it up, and it gives them no time to react. So if you look on the right-hand side here, we'll walk through the step-by-step of how this product works. First, wastewater typically flows out. So under normal circumstances, as everything's flowing as it should, wastewater is moving right through that backwater valve. But as you have the back charge, we move to step 2, and the flapper automatically closes. So the force of that water is closing the flapper, preventing the majority of the water from getting back upstream. And then step 3, as that blockage goes away downstream, or as the rainfall kind of subsides there and water can move freely again, the flapper reopens, allowing any drainage from upstream within the building to move back down into the wastewater system. So now we'll test our knowledge for the first time today and kind of recap the previous slide. How do Zurn backwater valves function? Place the following in the correct order. A, the flapper automatically reopens when the pressure of the wastewater sewer flow is greater in the proper direction. B, the flapper automatically closes when wastewater sewage attempts to reverse its flow back into the building. And C, the flapper remains open when wastewater sewage flows in the proper direction out of the building. So the correct order here is going to be C, B, A, as we learned previously. So now we're going to take a look specifically at some individual products that are offered within the spec drain and light commercial product line. And let's start that off with the Z1088. So this is a product that I mentioned before as one of Zurn's oldest products dating back to 1900. There have been some design changes along the way, but it was originally patented as a manual backwater floodgate. And what this means is there's actually two checks within this backwater valve. One, you can see this image is kind of the opposite of the last one, where water is freely moving from right to left under normal conditions. You can see the flapper valve that's in there on the right-hand side of the valve. So as you do have a storm surge or a backup in the sewage piping, it's going to push that flapper closed and seal off the majority of the water coming through. But it also offers a dual check, which is the manual gate valve that you can see on the left-hand side of the photo. So if you were to take the cover off of this, there's a handle on the top that you can turn, and you can see there's that threaded gear that runs down through there. So as you turn that gear, it lowers that gate-type valve you see on the left-hand side. And if you look closely, you'll see in the side of the cast iron body, there is a tapered, kind of angled piece that forces that gate valve into the seat. So it's really going to push that down. So the tighter you turn, the harder it's going to push that gate valve against the seat. And what's important about that is you're going to get a lot better seal than you would from the flapper itself. So let's say you're in one of those low-lying areas that's prone to flooding and you have a big rainfall event and you know that your storm sewer is starting to back up. You run down to your basement, you turn that gate valve down really tight, and it's going to prevent all of the water from actually getting into the building, as opposed to with that flapper type that actually allows some water to seep through it. So it's a much better seal when you know you're going to have a prolonged event of flooding that potentially could damage your house. So this Z1088 is an all cast iron body. The internal components are typically bronze, with the exception of the flapper valve. The flapper valve is going to be plastic in the 4-inch size. On the 6-inch size, it will be bronze. So the difference between those two, on the plastic flapper valve, it actually is a plastic seat what presses into the body along with a snapped-on plastic flapper on top of it. There's an O-ring in the face of that. The action of opening and closing that flapper is very smooth. You're not going to get a whole lot of wobble in it. It closes very easily, and when it presses up against that O-ring, it's a very good seal. When you go with the bronze gate flapper valve inside, those are actually held together by a machined hinge pin, which we manually install during the assembly process of the backwater valve. So the flapper itself is a little bit heavier. It will use less force to keep it closed because it's heavier, but it's a little bit sloppier of a fit. Some people see bronze as more durable. That's something they have in their heads. It's not necessarily true. Plastic, as long as there are no chemicals in that line, plastic is going to last just as long as the rest of the components in there as well. So it's just two different options depending on what the preference is of the end user that you may see in a number of different backwater valves, including the Z1088. And one other note to point out here that you see at the very bottom below key features there is that because this has a gate valve in it, many people try to use it as a shutoff valve in either pressurized or gravity flow situations. This valve is not intended to be used that way. It's intended for that gate valve to be used under short periods of time, let's say for a day or two, if you're going to have backups, but it's not intended to be used as a long-term shutoff valve where you have flow running through and you simply want to stop that flow. So just keep that in mind because customers have asked that in the past. It's not really designed or tested for that application. The next product we want to look at is one of our most common backwater valve products. This is the Z1090. So both the Z1088 and 1090 here are typically used on horizontal lines running out of the building. So you're going to have some slope built into that line running into and away from the backwater valve. Now the Z1090 features just one check inside of it, which is the swinging flapper type valve. It has no hub connections on it and is offered in 2, 3, 4, and 6-inch sizes. You can see there is a cover on top of that to allow it to be accessible, held down by 4 bolts. There's an optional threaded cover to go into that that looks very much like a cleanout plug, if that's the preferred way you would like to access that. That cover, in this case of the bolted cover, is gasketed to make sure that when you do get a back pressure that seals off that flapper valve, the next place that the water is going to want to go is up, and it's going to want to flood out the top. So you have to make sure that gasket is in place and it's bolted down tightly so that nothing seeps out the top of the backwater valve itself. This one you can see is all cast iron with no hub connections, as I mentioned before, and the internal flapper could be either plastic or bronze, depending on which material you select. The next product we're looking at here is the Z1091, kind of one of the less common products that we offer, and it's for a very unique application. The left side of the picture here you see is the inlet connection to it, which is a hub connection. So it would accept a spigot end of pipe, and you need to use either a gasket or an old style lead and oakum seal to seal that off. But on the right side, this actually isn't a pipe connection, but rather it discharges into a tank or some type of sump pit. So what this backwater valve is doing is if that sump pit were to flood or fill up, it's preventing any of that flow that builds up above the valve or pipe opening here to get back up that pipe. So you cannot connect a pipe to the downstream side of this valve. Again, this one's Duracoated cast iron with either a PVC or bronze flapper in it, and it's offered in 3-inch through 10-inch pipe sizes. The next option we see here is the Z1095, and this one's actually shown with an optional extension built into the top, just to give you an idea of some of the other features that we can offer on these products. Now the Z1095 is the same as the 1090, except for the connection type. The 1090 was specifically no hub connections. The Z1095 is offered with a hub and spigot inlet and outlet connection. And it's offered in 2-inch through 10-inch pipe sizes, so a little bit wider range of pipe connections there on it. The extension that you see here is offered in our Canadian line as a -15 option, but we also do custom versions of this in the Spectrain line as well here in the United States. This is a rather short extension. You could have anywhere up to 2 feet of extension built up above this. And we can do that in a number of ways. We could thread a standpipe into the top of that and put a clean out on top, or we could have specific pieces made that bolt on that actually extend that up to the surface. So if you're recessing this in the ground, let's say that your waistline is a foot or 18 inches or even 2 feet below the ground, you want some type of extension to bring that up to the finished floor, especially if you're not going to put this in an access box. If you plan on burying it in the ground or encasing it in concrete, you need an extension to make sure it's accessible. So you can take that cover off the top, look down in there from time to time, make sure that no debris has built up, or make sure that none of the flapper components have worked their way free, so that you know when that back charge does come that it's going to work properly and nothing's blocking the flapper itself. So that is one of the options that we offer. And I do recommend only using extensions up to 2 feet, because beyond that, you're not going to be able to get your arm down in there to remove any debris or to actually remove or replace a flapper if that time does come. So extensions over that are going to make it really impossible to maintain, and therefore we don't typically recommend them or create specials for them. So the next product that we want to talk about in the Spectrain line here is unique and a little bit different than the last few that we've talked about, which featured flapper type valves. This type of valve is a float type backwater valve and is intended to be used on a vertical line. If you tried to use a horizontal, let's say a Z1090 or 1095 on a vertical line, the flapper would either always hang open or it would always remain closed depending what orientation you had it in. So to solve that problem, we came out with the Z1099, which has a floating ball inside of it that when water backs up, the ball floats to the top and it seats against a rubber neoprene gasket in there. There are also ribs built into the inside of this body, preventing that ball from actually falling out of the bottom of the backwater valve itself. When you look at the top of that picture there, you'll notice that there's a bronze threaded piece inserted into the top of the backwater valve. And that's so you can thread that seat out, remove the ball if there is damage to it, or remove any debris that's built up around it. So as you see in the image there, this is typically installed directly below a drain body in your basement. So the ball needs to be accessible so that you can remove those pieces up through the drain. So in this case, you would take the grate off, unthread that seat, pull it out. You can inspect the gasket to see if there's any debris, and then check the ball and check for any debris around it. So this is, again, a cast iron product, a bronze seat in the top with a neoprene gasket, a plastic ball, so those are standard materials for it, and it comes in 2, 3, 4, and 6-inch sizes, which could be either no hub by no hub, meaning top and bottom no hub connections, or it could be threaded by no hub, where the top portion would be threaded and could go into the drain body that way, and the bottom would be a no hub connection. The last product we're going to look at here individually is a light commercial backwater valve, the BW2930. So this product is very similar to the Z1090. The cover you can see actually threads onto the top of the body. It's all plastic. It's not really intended for traffic areas. As you can see, it's not completely flat. It does have ribs in the top to help you unthread it. So normally this would be hidden behind an access panel or below an access plate in the floor. But being that it's all plastic, The connection types on it are going to be either a PVC glued or an ABS glued type of connection. Inside of this backwater valve, you would have a plastic flapper, very similar to the flapper that you'd see in the 1090. So it's the same type of operation. There typically is an arrow on the body itself showing you which direction flow typically goes in to make sure that it's installed in the proper direction. So these are offered, as I mentioned, both PVC and ABS materials in 3, 4, and 6-inch outlet sizes, and you can find that in our light commercial catalog. So next, let's talk about some of the questions that people ask when they call into our customer care team or application engineering about backwater valves. The first really is how to specify the product. So we'll go over that in a little bit, where we're going to talk about what questions specifically should we ask to make sure we're specifying the correct backwater valve product. But the next questions that they kind of do are kind of the post-sale questions, like troubleshooting, maintenance, those types of things. So the most important things with backwater valves, I mentioned it briefly before, but you want to periodically check inside of the backwater valve. So that means having access to that cover where you can remove it, open it up and look down in there, and make sure that no solids have built up. So very frequently, you may want to make sure that these are installed with a slight slope to them if possible, so that any water running through it's going to run from inlet to outlet and easily flush any debris out of it. There are typically not low points in these. They're typically all sloped toward the outlet. But any additional pitch you can put in, make sure that that debris is easily flushed out, and it's not going to prevent the flapper from hanging up on any debris in there. The other thing you may want to check is just to make sure that the flapper is in place and it's freely swinging open and closed. On the case of the bronze backwater valves, if it's not, you may want to put some grease on the hinge pins to make sure that no debris is in there binding them up. Or that nothing solid has come down there, hit that flapper valve, possibly knocked it out of place, or actually removed it from the hinge pins. So it's good to check those periodically, and it's very easy to do by removing the 4 bolts of the cover or unthreading that cover if it's the threaded cleanout style cover. All right, so for our next test your knowledge question related to backwater valves, what are Zurn backwater valves' top 3 benefits? A, highly accessible, B, highly durable, C, alternative use as a shutoff valve, or D, diverse offerings. So our top 3 benefits here are going to be A, B, and D. As we learned earlier, we don't want to use that backwater valve as a shutoff valve, so that's clearly not the right answer here. All right, so now a customer has called us up. They say they want a backwater valve, but they don't know what kind. Where do we start? The first place to start typically is what type of valve do they need? Is it being installed on a horizontal line or a vertical line? Is it going to have pipe connections on both sides, or does it need to discharge into a pit? So once we have the answer to those types of questions, it's going to help narrow it down to a smaller group of products. Number 2, what type of body material are they going to need for this case? So cast iron we saw is most common on the majority of our products, or potentially stainless steel if they may have some chemicals running through that line, or PVC or ABS if they're looking for something a little less expensive. Then what size for flow? We offer 2-inch through 10-inch pipe connections, so once we know their pipe connection size, they'll help really narrow it down to a specific product. And what type of connection do they want? Do they want a no-hub connection? Is it an area where hub and spigot is required, where gaskets are prevented? Or can they actually use a glued connection on those PVC backwater valves? And then finally, what other options? When you look through our catalog at backwater valves, there's a few options out there. You may have an option for the bronze flapper valve that goes inside of the backwater valve, so that's one option that you could have out there. We also offer the threaded cover, or we could galvanize the body. So just a couple options available, but we want to make sure that we're meeting all the customers' needs by offering those items to them. So here's kind of an overview of all of the backwater valves we offer. Try to categorize them a little bit for you to help you narrow it down to a specific product with your customers. One product that's on here that we really didn't go into detail on is the Z1740. So you can see it's the second one from the end there. That's our all stainless steel backwater valve, including the threaded cover in the top. Like I mentioned, used in applications typically where you may have some chemicals that potentially could damage the product. So just keep in mind that they're not too common, but that option is out there if necessary. Then going down the left-hand side, you can see the 2-inch through 10-inch connection sizes. So you can see there's probably on the outskirts of the 2-inch and the 10-inch, there's not very many options, but when you get into the common sizes of 4 and 6, you have a whole wide range of different options available there. So depending on the pipe size, it could potentially narrow that down what your options are as far as backwater valves go. And then of course we want to touch on InSpec. We want all our customers to be using this to help build their specifications and piece schedules. I took a look on InSpec earlier today to see what backwater valves were available, and we have the Z1088, the Z1090, and Z1099 all available on InSpec to help build specifications for our customers. Our last test your knowledge question of the day: place the following specified steps in the correct order. A, size; B, body material; C, other options; and D, valve type. So the correct order here is going to be D, B, A, and C. Really, you can't go wrong with the order as long as you're asking those questions, but they'll help you to really narrow down the products if you're specifically asking those types of questions. So just to summarize, looking at those three main customers that we always want to be thinking about with our products, from the building owner's standpoint, they know that Zurn has been making backwater valves for over 100 years. It's a durable product. It's going to work properly when they need it to, but in the event that maintenance is required, it's very easy to maintain by simply removing that cover from the floor level and reaching your hand down in to replace any parts that you need. From the architect and engineer, again, they know that Zurn has a very durable product that's easy to maintain. They should keep their end building owner happy. And then for the contractor, again, not necessarily labor-saving options, but they know that maintenance is easy with these products. If they have to go in, remove that cover, they can do it by removing the 4 bolts or threading that cleanout cover out of the top. And once they look down inside that, there's really only one feature that they need to focus on. That's the flapper valve. If they do need to actually provide some maintenance on that flapper, it's easy to do so. If you notice that the flapper is broke, you probably want to remove the whole assembly, the flapper and the seat. You can easily pry that flapper out and the seat out by using a screwdriver. Get a replacement flapper. Make sure you clean that internal lip that it's going to press into, because there's a press fit feature between those two pieces. So clean that lip inside there, put a bit of sealant around the outside of the seat, and then press that back in, possibly using a rubber mallet if you need a little bit more force to put that in place. But once it's set in place, it's pretty quick to resolve to that point. It's only going to take you 5-10 minutes to replace that piece. And just as a summary as far as Zurn as a whole goes and how we handle backwater valves, if you have technical questions on these, the best place to start is always with customer care. They're going to be able to help you out with some of the more basic questions. If you get something very specific or a special custom item that you want to do, they'll send you over to application engineering. We do some customization on backwater valves. Nothing as crazy as we do on like roof drains or floor drains or anything like that. Typically, people want to ask about extensions and what different options are and how to get specific extension heights. But if there is customization that needs to be done, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll discuss it with the customer and find the best solution for them. As far as resources go, when you go out on the website, we mentioned InSpec. If you go to the product page for any of our backwater valve products, you have your standard information on there, spec sheet, suffix option sheets. You may have BIM models available depending what component it is. If you go to the Z1088 page, it's really interesting. We have installation guides for the extensions, and then we also have an O&M guide as well for operation and maintenance that shows you some additional information on that Z1088 that will help extend the life of the product.